316 men pulled alive from the water, 880 lost. No distress call confirmed. No rescue ships dispatched for 4 days. The USS Indianapolis sank on July 30th, 1945. 1,200 men aboard. 2 Japanese torpedoes. 12 minutes to go under. Mission classified. Route unescorted. Official Navy records list drowning, dehydration, exposure. Survivors reported something else. Circles in the dark water. Dorsal fins cutting the surface at first light. If nearly 900 entered the ocean alive, what killed over 500 before help arrived? The heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis left Guam at 1700 hours on July 28, 1945. Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III stood on the bridge as the ship cleared the harbor entrance. The war in the Pacific was entering its final weeks. Japan's surrender seemed inevitable. But the Indianapolis carried orders marked eyes only, sealed in the captain's safe. The mission had been simple. Deliver a classified cargo to Tinian Island. The crew never learned what sat in the sealed crates welded to the hangar deck. The ship crossed open ocean at maximum speed, no escort, no destroyer screen. On July 26th, sailors watched as the crates were offloaded under armed guard. The Indianapolis had carried components of the atomic bomb that would level Hiroshima 10 days later. With the cargo delivered, new orders arrived. Proceed to Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. Report to Vice Admiral Jesse Oldendorf for further assignment. The route covered 1,200 nautical miles of open water. Standard procedure called for a zigzag pattern, an evasive maneuver designed to complicate submarine targeting. But fuel conservation mattered. The captain received discretion to zigzag only when visibility warranted. The night of July 29th brought heavy cloud cover. No moon, no stars. Darkness pressed against the portholes like black cloth. Most of the crew slept below decks. The Indianapolis cut through calm seas at 17 knots, running straight and level. Radioman second class. Donald Allen finished his shift at 2300 hours. He locked the communications room and headed for his bunk in the forward compartment. At 0:14 hours on July 30th, a lookout on the starboard bow saw something break the surface. A white line of foam. It moved too fast to be a whale. He opened his mouth to shout a warning. The first torpedo struck the forward starboard side, just below the waterline. The explosion tore through fuel tanks and ammunition stores. Fire erupted from the bow, climbing 30 feet into the air. The blast killed everyone in the forward compartments instantly. 12 seconds later, the second torpedo hit amidships. The explosion severed electrical systems. The bridge went dark. Emergency lighting failed to activate. Below decks, watertight doors jammed in their frames. Men trapped in the engine room felt cold seawater flooding through ruptured hull plates. The ship listed 15 degrees to starboard within 90 seconds. Captain McVeigh reached the bridge and gave the order to abandon ship, but the public address system was dead. No power for the radio, no way to transmit an SOS. Damage control parties tried to reach the compartments below, but the passageways were blocked by wreckage and rising water. On the main deck, sailors cut life rafts free from their mounts. Many of the rafts had been damaged in the explosions. Those that remained intact carried capacity markings for 20 men each. Lieutenant Commander K.C. Moore, the ship's damage control officer, made his way to the stern. He found Ensign Thomas Brophy attempting to launch a lifeboat. The davits were jammed. The boat hung at a 45-degree angle, useless. Moore told Brophy to find a raft and get over the side. The ship had maybe 10 minutes left. The Indianapolis rolled further to starboard. Men on the port side found themselves standing on what had been a vertical bulkhead. Chief Petty Officer James Belcher grabbed a Kapok life vest from a storage locker and threw it to a young seaman. The seaman fumbled the catch. The vest slid across the tilting deck and disappeared over the side. Belcher told him to jump anyway. The water would be warmer than waiting for the ship to take him under. At 0:28 hours, the bow dipped below the surface. The stern rose out of the water, propellers still turning slowly in the air. Men jumped from railings, slid down the hull plates, pushed away from the dying ship. The Indianapolis made a sound like tearing metal, a low groan that carried across the dark water. Then the suction began. The ship went under stern first, dragging debris and bodies and men who had waited too long. Seaman Michael Kurila surfaced 20 yards from where the ship disappeared. He had no life vest. The nearest raft floated 50 feet away, crowded with men clinging to the ropes. He started swimming, his boots filled with water. He kicked them off and kept going. The ocean felt warm, almost pleasant, nothing like the North Atlantic where he had trained. By 0200 hours, the surface was quiet. Small groups of survivors called out to each other in the darkness. Some had found rafts. Others clung to floating debris, wooden planks, empty shell casings, anything that offered buoyancy. A few wore life vests. Most did not. The Indianapolis had carried 1,300 life vests for nearly 1,200 men, but the speed of the sinking left most of the vests stowed below decks. Radioman Allen found himself in the water with no memory of jumping. He had gone to sleep in his bunk. The explosion woke him. He ran toward the ladder, but the compartment was already flooding. He remembered pushing through a hatch, then nothing until he surfaced, choking on salt water. He could see lights in the distance, small electric torches carried by other survivors. He swam toward the nearest light. By dawn on July 30th, roughly 880 men floated in groups scattered across 15 square miles of ocean. Some groups numbered over 100 men. Others consisted of 3 or 4 sailors clinging to the same piece of wreckage. The sun rose fast. Within 2 hours, the temperature climbed above 90 degrees. Men without hats began to show signs of sunburn. Those with vests discovered the kapok filling absorbed water, making the vests heavier as the day progressed. Lieutenant Commander Moore organized the largest group, approximately 320 men clustered around 5 life rafts. He took a head count. He made a list of the injured. One sailor had compound fractures in both legs. Another had severe burns across his chest and arms. Moore had no morphine, no bandages, no medical supplies, except what men carried in their pockets. He assigned pharmacist's mate, Eugene Morgan, to assess the wounded. Morgan reported that without fresh water and medical attention, the burn victims would not survive past the second day. The Indianapolis had been scheduled to arrive in Leyte Gulf on July 31st. Standard procedure required ships to report arrival, but no procedure required anyone to report when a ship failed to arrive. The operations officer in Leyte noted the Indianapolis as overdue. He did not report it. He assumed the ship had been diverted, a common occurrence in the final weeks of the war. The headquarters staff in Guam marked the Indianapolis as having arrived at Leyte. No one verified. No search was initiated. On the morning of July 31st, nearly 48 hours after the sinking, the men in the water began to see shapes moving below the surface. Dark silhouettes, 8 to 10 feet long, circling just beyond visibility. At first, survivors assumed they were seeing dolphins, but the movement pattern was wrong. Dolphins moved in arcs, playful and fast. These shapes moved in slow, deliberate circles, spiraling closer with each pass. Seaman First Class. Robert Harrington, floating alone on a piece of timber, watched a dorsal fin break the surface 30 feet away. The fin was white-tipped, distinctive against the dark water. It circled once, then submerged. Harrington pulled his legs up onto the timber and waited. The shape passed beneath him close enough to create a wake. Then it moved on, toward the nearest group of survivors. The oceanic white-tipped shark inhabits deep water far from shore. It feeds opportunistically on squid, fish, and carrion. Marine biologists in 1945 understood the species as curious, but not typically aggressive toward humans. That assessment was based on observations near reefs and coastal zones. No one had documented white-tip behavior around large concentrations of distressed swimmers in open ocean. Lieutenant Adrian Marks, a Navy pilot stationed in Peleliu, received routine patrol orders for the morning of August 2nd. His PBY Catalina amphibious aircraft would fly a standard search pattern over the Philippine Sea, looking for downed airmen or enemy submarines. The mission was scheduled for 6 hours. He expected to find nothing. The war was nearly over. Japanese naval activity had declined to almost zero in the region. At 1100 hours, Marks was 250 miles northeast of Leyte Gulf when his co-pilot pointed at something in the water. An oil slick, long and dark, stretching across the surface. Marks descended to 300 feet. The oil slick resolved into debris, wooden planks, empty crates, life vests. Then he saw the men, bodies floating face down, others waving weakly at the aircraft. He counted 30, then 50, then stopped counting. Marks radioed his base. Emergency. Survivors in the water. Coordinates followed. He dropped life rafts and supplies, then made a decision that violated standing orders. He landed the PBY on open ocean swells. The aircraft was not designed for sea landings outside protected harbors. The risk of hull damage was severe. Marks did not care. He taxied toward the nearest group of survivors and began pulling men aboard. By the time rescue ships arrived 8 hours later, Marks had 56 men packed into an aircraft rated for 30. Some clung to the wings. Others sat in the gun blisters. The PBY could no longer take off. The hull had cracked during landing. Marks waited with the survivors until the destroyer USS Doyle arrived after dark. The men pulled aboard the Doyle were in various stages of medical collapse. Eyes swollen shut from saltwater exposure, lips cracked and bleeding, skin burned black across shoulders and faces. Several had no hair left. Fuel oil coated their bodies, mixed with vomit and blood. Pharmacist's mate Robert Yates began triage on the deck. He counted 20 men who would not survive the night without immediate transfusions. The ship carried medical supplies for crew injuries, not mass casualties. Lieutenant Commander Clayton Hartigan recorded testimony from survivors as they were processed aboard the Doyle. He asked each man the same questions: name, rank, ship, how long in the water. The answers were consistent. USS Indianapolis, 4 days, torpedoed on the 30th. Hartigan checked his notes. No distress call had been received. No ship reported missing. He radioed fleet headquarters with the information. The response came back within 30 minutes. Expand search area. Recover all survivors. Locate remains. Over the next 12 hours, 7 ships joined the search. The destroyer USS Bassett found a group of 80 men, many delirious, some comatose. The destroyer escort USS Ringness pulled 39 survivors from the water, along with dozens of bodies. By midday on August 3rd, the count stood at 316 men rescued alive. The recovery of remains continued for another week. Fewer than 200 bodies were found. Over 600 men remained unaccounted for. The Navy's official inquiry opened on August 7th in Guam. Captain Alfred Granum chaired the investigation. His mandate was clear: determine cause of sinking, assess command decisions, identify failures in communication and rescue procedures. The inquiry lasted 2 weeks. 60 survivors gave testimony. Documents were reviewed. Radio logs examined. Navigation charts reconstructed. Captain McVeigh testified on August 14th, the day Japan announced surrender. He described the attack: 2 torpedoes, no time for evasive action. He explained his decision not to zigzag. Visibility was poor. Fuel conservation was a factor. The route had been designated as low risk by fleet intelligence. McVeigh provided copies of his orders. The orders contained no explicit requirement to zigzag under all conditions. The inquiry focused on 3 questions. Why was no distress call received? Why was the ship's absence not detected? Why did rescue take 4 days? The answers revealed systematic failures at multiple levels. The radio room had been destroyed in the first explosion. The Port Authority in Leyte had no procedure for tracking expected arrivals. The headquarters staff in Guam had marked the ship as arrived based on scheduled time, not confirmed communication. Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto of the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-58 was brought to Guam as a witness. Under questioning, he confirmed firing 2 torpedoes at the Indianapolis. He stated that zigzagging would not have prevented the attack. His submarine had tracked the target for over 2 hours with multiple firing solutions prepared. Despite Hashimoto's testimony, the Navy convened a court-martial for Captain McVeigh in December 1945. The charge was hazarding his ship through failure to zigzag. The trial lasted 7 days. McVeigh was found guilty. He received a letter of reprimand but was not dismissed from service. No other officer was charged in connection with the sinking or the failed rescue response. The question remained unresolved. How many men died from shark attacks specifically? Medical examiners reviewed the recovered remains, but could not determine whether attacks occurred before or after death in most cases. Survivors reported seeing men taken while still alive. Estimates ranged from 50 to 150, with no consensus. The Navy's final report, released in January 1946, listed causes of death as drowning, dehydration, salt poisoning, exposure, and injuries sustained during sinking. Shark attack was mentioned as a contributing factor, but not quantified. The report noted that Kapok life vests, when waterlogged, lost buoyancy. Men who initially survived the sinking often slipped from their vests during the 2nd or 3rd day. The Indianapolis casualty list stood at 879 killed. It remains the largest loss of life from a single ship in United States naval history. The ship had delivered the bomb that would end the war. 10 days after the components reached Tinian, Hiroshima was destroyed. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The story disappeared into classified files and survivor testimony. Dr. Lewis Haynes served as the chief medical officer aboard the Indianapolis. He survived the sinking and spent 4 days in the water with approximately 400 men in his group. In testimony given to naval investigators in August 1945, Haynes described the progression of symptoms among survivors. First day, most men remained alert despite minor injuries. Second day, severe sunburn and dehydration. Third day, salt poisoning widespread, men drinking seawater despite warnings. Fourth day, mass delirium, men swimming away from groups claiming they saw islands or rescue ships on the horizon. Haynes also documented shark behavior. He noted that attacks followed a pattern. The sharks would circle a group for hours without approaching closer than 15 to 20 feet. Then individuals would break from the circle and move directly toward isolated swimmers. The sharks were methodical. They selected targets that had separated from the main group, either through current drift or delusional swimming. Seaman First Class Lowell Dean Cox described an incident from his group of 38 men. On the second night, a sailor began shouting that he could see a hotel on the horizon. He insisted there was fresh water and beds waiting. Cox and 2 others tried to restrain him. The man broke free and swam away into darkness. They heard him calling back to them for approximately 10 minutes, then silence. At dawn, they saw dorsal fins circling the area where he had been. The largest group, led by Lieutenant Commander Moore, maintained better cohesion through strict discipline. Moore organized the men into a grid formation. No one was permitted to drift more than 10 feet from the nearest swimmer. Men were paired. Each pair was responsible for keeping the other conscious and attached to debris. Moore conducted head counts every 2 hours. On July 31st, Moore's count showed 287 men. By the morning of August 1st, the count was 239. 48 men lost in 24 hours. Moore questioned survivors about each loss. 17 men had died from injuries sustained during the sinking. 12 men had slipped from their vests during the night and drowned. The remaining 19 had simply disappeared. Chief Machinist's mate, Robert Brundage, described an attack he witnessed on August 1st at approximately 1400 hours. A sailor approximately 30 feet from Brundage's position began thrashing in the water. The thrashing stopped abruptly. The man went under. Brundage swam toward the location. He found a kapok vest floating empty, still tied. Blood darkened the water in a roughly circular pattern about 6 feet across. The psychological breakdown accelerated after 72 hours in the water. Men began reporting visions. Some saw aircraft that were not there. Others claimed to see land formations on the horizon. A common hallucination involved the Indianapolis itself, supposedly intact and waiting just below the surface. Men would dive down, attempting to reach the ship. They would surface choking, insisting they had touched the hull. Ensign Harlan Twible observed that men in groups experience fewer shark approaches than isolated individuals. He theorized that the sharks interpreted large clusters of humans as a single large organism, something to avoid. But when a man separated, the shark's behavior changed. It would follow at a distance, then close rapidly, bump the target once, and retreat. If the target reacted weakly, the shark would circle once more and then attack. The attack itself lasted only seconds. The shark would approach from below or behind, strike once, and disappear. The victim rarely had time to scream. Witnesses reported seeing the man pulled under suddenly, then nothing. The water would cloud briefly, then clear. Sometimes a vest would float to the surface. When rescue ships began pulling men from the water on the afternoon of August 2nd, medical personnel observed consistent injury patterns among the dead. Lacerations to the legs and lower torso were common. Missing limbs. Evidence of massive blood loss. But determining which injuries occurred before death and which occurred after proved impossible. Pharmacist's mate Morgan noted that several men displayed defensive wounds on their hands and forearms. Deep cuts consistent with attempting to push something away. These wounds indicated active resistance. But Morgan could not determine whether the men had been fighting sharks or pushing away delirious companions. The Navy's casualty investigation, completed in September 1945, included a section on environmental factors contributing to death. The report acknowledged shark presence. It noted testimony from survivors regarding attacks, but it stopped short of quantifying shark-related fatalities. Sharks were listed as a hazard, not a primary cause of death. Yet survivors continued to give consistent accounts. Giles McCoy, a private first class in the Marine Detachment, told investigators he counted at least 40 attacks in his group alone. Edgar Harrell, another Marine, estimated 30 to 50 men taken by sharks within his visual range. The numbers varied, but the pattern did not. In 1963, the Navy declassified portions of the Indianapolis investigation files. The documents revealed something the official report had omitted. Multiple survivors described seeing sharks feeding during daylight hours on August 1st and 2nd. The sharks did not wait for men to die. They were observed approaching living, conscious swimmers who had become separated from groups. This was not scavenging behavior. This was active predation on weakened prey. The Indianapolis carried a crew of 1,196 men. Approximately 300 died in the initial torpedo attack and sinking. That left 896 in the water. 316 survived. 580 died during the 4 days afloat. No medical examiner could state with certainty how many of those 580 were killed by sharks. But the survivors knew. They had watched it happen, some for 96 hours. The timeline of the Indianapolis disaster follows a clear sequence. Torpedoed at 0:14 hours on July 30th, 1945. Ship sank by 0:28 hours. Approximately 890 men entered the water alive. First visual sighting occurred at 1100 hours on August 2nd, 96 hours later. 316 men pulled from the water. 580 lost during the drift period. The question of how many died from shark attacks specifically has never been definitively answered, but the evidence points to a convergent explanation. The oceanic white-tip shark is an opportunistic predator. It inhabits deep water where large prey is scarce. When the Indianapolis sank, it created an unprecedented situation. 900 humans suddenly appeared in the shark's territory, injured, bleeding, disoriented, and unable to escape. The sharks did not cause the disaster. They responded to it. Marine biologists who reviewed survivor testimony in later years noted that the described behavior matches known white-tip patterns. The sharks circled for extended periods, assessing the situation. They avoided large cohesive groups. They targeted individuals who separated, whether through delirium, exhaustion, or current drift. The attacks were not frenzied. They were selective. A shark would approach, test with a bump, then strike if the target showed weakness. This is classic ambush predation, not random aggression. The majority of the 580 deaths likely resulted from drowning, dehydration, and exposure. Men slipped from waterlogged vests. Men drank seawater and died from salt poisoning. Men hallucinated and swam away from groups into empty ocean. But survivor testimony is consistent. Sharks killed dozens of men, possibly over 100. The exact number disappeared into the chaos of mass casualty documentation. The Navy had no protocol for distinguishing between a man who drowned after shark attack, a man who died from blood loss after attack, and a man who was already dead when sharks fed on the remains. What allowed the sharks to kill anyone at all was the 4-day gap between sinking and rescue. If the Indianapolis had been found within 24 hours, shark predation would have been minimal. The sharks were present from the beginning, but they did not attack immediately. They observed. They waited. As men weakened and separated from groups, the sharks adapted their behavior. By the 3rd and 4th day, attacks increased because targets became more vulnerable and more isolated. The failure to detect the ship's absence for 96 hours stemmed from multiple systemic breakdowns. The Indianapolis transmitted no confirmed distress signal. Standard procedure required ships to report arrival at destination, but no procedure required anyone to notice when a ship failed to arrive. The Port Authority in Leyte had no tracking system for expected vessels. The headquarters staff in Guam marked the Indianapolis as arrived based on schedule, not confirmation. Additionally, the Indianapolis had been traveling under classified orders after delivering atomic bomb components to Tinian. Operational security meant fewer personnel knew the ship's exact route and timeline. This reduced the chance that someone would notice the absence. The combination of communication failure, procedural gaps, and classification restrictions created a perfect condition for the ship to disappear without alarm. Captain McVeigh's court-martial in December 1945 focused blame on a single decision, the choice not to zigzag continuously. But Commander Hashimoto, the Japanese submarine captain, testified that zigzagging would not have prevented the attack. The court-martial ignored the systemic failures. No one was charged for the lack of distress call reception. No one was charged for failing to track the ship's arrival. No one was charged for the 4-day delay in initiating search operations. The Indianapolis disaster led to immediate changes in Navy protocol. All ships were required to report position at regular intervals, not just upon arrival. Port authorities were required to track expected arrivals and report overdue vessels within 12 hours. Distress procedures were overhauled to include multiple redundant systems. Life raft equipment standards were revised. McVeigh carried the guilt of 879 deaths until his suicide in 1968. Survivors advocated for his exoneration for 32 years. In 2000, Congress finally acknowledged that McVeigh had been unjustly blamed for failures beyond his control. The resolution came too late for the captain, but it clarified the historical record. The Indianapolis wreckage was located in August 2017 by a civilian expedition funded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. The ship rests at a depth of 18,000 feet in the Philippine Sea, broken into multiple sections. The discovery provided closure for remaining survivors and families. It also confirmed details that had been disputed for 72 years. Today, the Indianapolis is remembered primarily for two facts. It delivered the atomic bomb components that ended World War II, and it suffered the worst shark attack in recorded history. The first fact is documented with precision. The second fact remains murky. Estimates range from dozens to over 150 men killed by sharks. No official count exists. The ambiguity is permanent. What is certain is that 580 men died in water that could have saved them if rescue had arrived sooner. Some drowned, some succumbed to exposure, some lost their minds and swam into oblivion, and some were taken by sharks that would not have had the opportunity if the system had functioned as designed. The sharks were a symptom. The disease was institutional failure. Multiple failures, cascading across 4 days, while men floated waiting for help that did not know they needed it. The survivors carried the memory for the rest of their lives. Annual reunions, advocacy groups, testimony to historians. The last survivor, Harold Bray, died in October 2021 at the age of 96. With his death, the Indianapolis disaster passed from living memory into history. The official records remain. The witness statements remain. The debate over exact numbers remains. The Navy lists 879 killed. It attributes most deaths to drowning and exposure. It mentions sharks as a contributing factor. If protocols worked, who answers for 800 men who waited 4 days?